you basically invented the cable subscriber / licensing and ad revenue model. And having watched your industry evolve over the last 25, 30 years, we're very curious to know, where do you think it's heading?
There's just the entire switch of who controls what in the industry today. You know, when I started out and built USA Network, first Madison Square Garden Sports, and then changed it into USA Network, created the model, the business model combining advertising revenue with licensing model revenue to the cable system, and they paid us. It was reversing the television model, where the television networks paid the local stations to carry their product. Starting up, we had to reverse that model. So that's why cable networks have been so successful in really creating viable, sustainable program networks over a long period of time. But that was in the days, and has been for a couple decades, we program and people watched. Today, the consumer is in charge. The consumer has access to so many different over-the-top. They can get Netflix. They can go to get Hulu. They can do. They can just do broadband out of Maker Studios or on YouTube or wherever you want to go. There are just many, many places to go and get programming today. So these models that were created are still very strong. They're very strong businesses, but they're also being challenged by the over-the-top suppliers, where people can get alternative programming. And when you look at what appeals to the youngest of the audiences, to the millennials and even younger, you know, the concept of broadcast networks, or even in some cases cable networks, doesn't really enter their thinking. And so it's become much more democratized in that, from that point of view. And while it's easier to get into the market, it's easy, there's lower barrier of entry. Anyone with a smartphone can be a videographer today and put it on the internet. Marketing is a big, big challenge, because how do you get noticed? How do you get in? We all know the stories of the sort of the things, the people, the celebrities that pop out of some YouTube thing, that video that's gotten, 2 million views or something like that. But it's very unusual. I mean, there are millions and millions and millions of video sources out there that go nowhere, except maybe somebody in your family watches it. So the challenge is really to be able to really find your audience in the marketplace. But if you're a content provider, like we were at USA Network, it's a great time to be in the business, because people are distributors are hunting. So many different sources of distribution are hunting for content. And after all, it's not the technology that the consumer really values, it's the content. But they want to get it everywhere. They want to get it on TV, they want to get it on their laptops, they want to get it on their smartphones, they want it everywhere and when they want it. And so a whole different pattern of viewing has really emerged in the binge viewing. So someone like Netflix coming up with amazing original series and then releasing them all on one day. And, people watch the whole thing. They stay up all night and watch all.
Guilty.
Yeah. And this is really changing people's viewing habits.
But that is a model that's emerged within an established monetization structure. Mm-hmm. How do you monetize a binge? How do you monetize the viral video that you then want to serve up as part of your programming? What's the marketing there? If you were in this business now, what would Kay be doing to make money off of this?
If I were going to start something in the business now, I would go to develop the most vibrant content that I could, and then I would shop it to different marketplaces, because there are different markets to do it. And I would figure out a way to maintain control. It is very hard to maintain control as a producer of content. It's very hard to maintain control going to the normal distribution to broadcast and cable, because of their power in distribution. They can actually bargain to own your product, and you get a sliver of it on the back end. If you go to a over-the-top provider, or if you just go to the internet source and put your program up on YouTube or something like that. It's very hard to get the advertising or that kind of support. So I would look still for something that would give me some kind of subscription or consumer pay model. In other words, it might be very interesting to do something that says, I'm going to produce this series and it's going to cost you $1.99 for each episode, or something like that. No commercials, really pure, but I would have to have the confidence that I had something that people really wanted. I mean, this is one of the reasons I loved the sports business, because the competition in the sports business is to get the rights. Once you have the rights to the big sporting events, then you know what you're going to be able to do with it. You know, so it has a predictability about it. People will pay for it. You can find that audience, you know. In the creative side, when you're trying to do a series or you're trying to do a one-off, is almost impossible, to be honest with you. Unless it's a movie that you then sell to a channel where there are movies. It's very hard to do one-offs in today's world.
Well, it's interesting that the sort of reader or viewer funded content isn't necessarily a new idea. It's new for the visual medium. You know, magazines have been doing, some magazines have done it very successfully.
Yes.
But the trick, of course, is, are you producing something worth paying for?
Right. Of course. I mean, it's a marketplace. And like I said, it's much harder to market today than, because there's so much competition out there that the marketing is so key to the success of programming today. Whereas when I started off in the business, we were so prescient and so early in the marketplace that we were the first cable networks that had brought somebody in their home something different than what the 3 broadcast networks were bringing them. So it stood out. If you could get the distribution, you stood out. Today, you can get distribution different places, but will anyone know you're there?
It's almost like authors who are e-publishing, self-publishing their books. The value that a traditional publisher brings is very much the same as a traditional cable or broadcast network brings. They have the scale to market to massive amounts of people simultaneously. You lose that if you self-publish. You can only talk to the people you already have in your
network or your in your community. Yeah, I mean, it's changing. The openness of the internet has really is changing everybody's business model that is in communications, no matter what. Look what's happening to newspaper publishers or magazine publishers, or you look at the television. Look what happened to the music business. The music business was the first one to be disaggregated with file sharing. And the music business the music industry tried to stop it by lawsuits. They ultimately won some lawsuits, but ultimately the consumer won because they really couldn't stop what the consumer wanted. And I'm a strong believer that you can't alter the pattern of the consumer once they have something available to them. I think today for parents and kids, it's a fighting battle for parents to say to kids they actually should pay for something, because kids think everything is free. And so, okay, in that marketplace, is it try then buy? What is your model? And it's just like newspapers. A certain amount, you're on the New York Times. If you're a subscriber to the New York Times, you can get everything that they have on the internet. If you're not a subscriber to the New York Times, you can get some top stories, but then if you want other things, you've got to pay for them. And so everybody's having to change their model, and it has to have value. If it doesn't have value, no one's going to watch it, no one's going to read it, no one's going to buy it.
That raises an interesting question, though, when we look at the way that, especially within magazine, newspaper community, and as a new board member at Time Inc., this I'm sure will become a chief focus of your attention in coming months. As the native advertising model becomes increasingly popular, we're asking people to pay for advertising.
Well, people pay for advertising all the time.
I mean, pay to see it.
Yeah. Well, perhaps, but take television, for example. In cable television, people have been paying for cable television for decades now, and there's advertising on the shows that
And I
are there
keep
too.
trying to fast forward through it.
And that's one of the challenges, because when people can, with the TiVos and the DVRs and all of the devices that we have now for delaying programming and watching it later, or watching it at our convenience, which is now what the consumer expects, the challenge is, will they watch advertising? And there's recent studies that come out to say these series, people and they liken it to people's education level and their income level, and they say these people who are highly educated, have a higher income, are more likely to skip the commercials than people that don't. So the commercials on television get viewed more often by people that are watching reality shows or competition shows or something. They stay in because they, probably many of them, are also using other devices to communicate at the same time. So they're using their smartphones or their iPads or whatever it is and talking about the show while the commercials are running, but they're there and they're running and they do see them. So it's really interesting. I mean, it's a very much more complex market today.